You know, when a farmer has to go to buy stuff, you got to pay what they want. When we sell stuff, we got to take what they give us. You can't say you need this much or I'll put it back in the field. No, you can't do that. It don't work that way.
Musser Farm is located on the southwestern edge of Manchester Borough. It once was one of many small family farms that dotted the area, most of which have given way to development or have been subsumed into larger operations. The names of some of these farms live on today primarily through the names of our local landmarks, including Hartman Street, Hartman Run, Willow Springs Road and Industrial Park, and Dalberton, while others have continued their operations into the 21st century, such as the Gross Farm Families and Properties.
My name is Helen Musser. I live at 4390 Board Road in Manchester, Pennsylvania. I've been here 65 years, and me and the dog are all that live here anymore. My husband died in February the 14th of 2018. We're in 20, aren't we?
The Musser family has lived and worked the land for the past century. The way in which the lives of the farm and its family have been intertwined with the larger community of York County, with Manchester and East Manchester townships, and with the borough of Manchester are explored in this documentary video. The makers of the video are fortunate to have the cooperation and participation of members of the Musser family and its treasure trove of historical information.
Out in the field in Lancaster are the first 4 generations of those. They were Moser when they came here, and somewhere in the 3rd or 4th generation it became Musser. My name is Glenn Musser, and I am the youngest of the Musser family that lived on the farm just north of Manchester on the Board Road.
The Manchester farm was established by the Gross family, who constructed the main farmhouse in 1852. The farm, which was then approximately 130 acres, remained in the Gross family until 1893, when it was sold to William Blaney. It remained in the Blaney family for 13 years. In July 1905, an agreement was reached between the Blaneys and Christian N. Musser to purchase the farm, which was then 102 acres. On March 19, 1906, the farm was deeded to Christian's son, Jacob. Jacob and his wife, Catherine Bayshore Musser, left the family farm in Lancaster County in 1906 and moved their household across the Susquehanna River into York County. As the family made its way to their new home, their young daughter, Salome Musser, recorded the following.
I was born on May 12th in 1900 to Jacob and Catherine Musser. My mother was from York County. I moved from East Donegal Township in Lancaster County to East Manchester Township near Manchester, York County. In 1906, everything was moved by horses and wagons, except the cattle. The cattle had to cross the then only bridge between Columbia and Wrightsville, the railroad bridge. When it was train time, everyone had to wait until the trains had gone. With the help of my neighbors, my dad moved some loads of implements and household things before moving day, as the people who were then living on the new farm made room for them. Christian N. Musser, my grandfather, and my dad Jacob had bought the farm of 102 acres the fall of 1905 and had plans of moving in March. They got to the farm safely on moving day, that is, all but the cattle and the folks with them. My 10-year-old brother was one of them. By the time they stopped to water cattle along the way, snowflakes started coming down. Plans had been made to stop for the night to rest the men and the cattle at the John Strickler farm, but due to the snow they were there for 3 nights. The Stricklers were kind and took care of people and cattle until they could go. Roads were not open like in our day, as those were the days of open sleighs and jingle bells. To walk across the Susquehanna Bridge cost 3 cents, but when no ice was on the river, there were 2 boats that crossed several times a day. When we took the boat, it was 5 cents. There was room to sit while crossing, but also a place to drive on with horse and carriage. I suppose there was not much a 5-year-old could do at moving time, so I was to stay with my grandfather, Jacob Bayshore, and Aunt Lizzie for some days. I rode all that way in a loaded wagon. My mother drove with my brother Aaron. I do not remember my first day on the new farm, but with my parents and brothers there and our new things in the house, I knew it was home. The garden on our farm had beds and paths. As soon as my dad had finished digging, I was to put seeds in little holes made with my finger. First one was near path for radish seed, next a lettuce seed, and last a red beet seed. The radish could be pulled first, then the lettuce, but the red beet stayed in till later when it was ready to cook and eat or can. The grown-ups planted the bed with other vegetables. Our house was built in 1852. The house was built of bricks and had 10 rooms with a large cellar and attic. It also had a brick summer house with a spring house, a well of water with a trough from spring to cool gallon crocks of eats, and a deeper one to cool cans of milk. We had a driving horse named Doll and 2 mules named Pet and Curl. After we lived in York County, my dad bought 2 mules at a farm sale named Mike and Dave. There were no tractors where we lived until 1918, and then they had broad metal tires. We went to school at Beeshore School, 1¼ miles walk for 7 months. Those who lived on farms did not start until the farm work was finished. As far as I remember, I always started the first day. We had morning and evening work to do, and change from school dress to work dress. We did not change our school dress every day. We lived on the farm until 1920, when my brother Christian was married and took over farming. I married David Dietz before either of us made a decision to serve the Lord. When our oldest daughter died of something like pneumonia, we were then willing to seek God's help and make a new beginning. In 1929, we were baptized, and in 1937, David was voted as a minister in the horse and buggy group. Together we raised 4 daughters, Ruth, Mary, Joanna, and Ladea. All went through nursing school. David died in 1982. After he died, I lived in an apartment at Glen Rock in southern York County. I wasn't lonely because I had Jesus with me, and I kept busy with crocheting lap robes, my flowers, and letter writing.
The Manchester area was home to many family farms in the early part of the 20th century. In 1915, in fact, a farming convention was held in the newly constructed Union Fraternity Hall on South Main Street. Musser's farm thrived in this era, with patriarch Jacob and wife Catherine Musser raising their 3 children there. This generation of Musser children attended the one-room Bayshore School, south of Manchester Borough. The oldest child of the family, Christian, known as Chris or CB, served in the U.S. Army during World War I. Chris was posted overseas and participated in 2 major battles on the Western Front, the San Miguel Offensive and the Mayus-Argonne Offensive. The latter of these battles involved 1.2 million American soldiers and lasted 47 days, up to the armistice on November 11, 1918. During his time in battle, Chris recalled loading ammunition for the famous war hero, Sergeant York. It was also in the Army that Chris was trained as a cook. In World War I, this involved producing large quantities of food in a field kitchen under trying circumstances, and then delivering the meals to soldiers in trenches using horse-drawn wagons. Compared to that, it must have seemed trivial that when later in life he put his cooking skills to use in service to his local church, VFW, and fire company. After returning from the Army, Chris married a local woman, Anna Dahl, in 1920, and they began their family on the farm. The second son, Aaron, was known as A.B. He became a local businessman and lived in town in a white frame house on South Main Street that still stands today. A.B. had a tractor sales and service operation on the current site of Bayshore and Kohler Ford dealership. Aaron also owned the Manchester Hotel from 1931 until it was demolished in the early 1960s and replaced with a service station.
I had 6 brothers and sisters. One of my brothers, the oldest, is 24 years older than me, Chris. Another brother, Gordon, the next oldest, was he worked on the farm, of course, when he was a young man, but he by and by got into heavy equipment operation. He helped build Route 83, worked on the nuclear power plant that's at Peach Bottom. That was it. Ran a big heavy crane there. Always did that kind of work. The next brother, Paul, was became the farmer. He went to got drafted into the Army in the late 50s. he actually went to Alaska also during his tour in the Army. And when he came back, he really took over the farm. My father, Chris, when he was in his late 60s, basically retired from farming. He kept playing with it, but Paul became the owner of the farm and did the farming and continued till he passed away. And then I had another brother, Alvin. Alvin was a Marine. Again, when I was 8 or 9, I remember him in his uniform coming home. He came home from the Marines after he did his duty. Worked for a farm company called Southern States, I believe it was. It's no longer around. Became Agway now. And then he really got into his passion. When he was in the Marines, he was a military policeman. And most of his career he spent as a policeman in one of the townships here in York County. And then I have twin sisters, Mary and Martha. They both still are living. Mary lives in Zion's View, and Martha lives in Thomasville, Pennsylvania.
The oldest of Chris and Anna's children, Chris Jr., now 98 years old in 2019, talked over his school days with his daughter, Pat Musser Calabrese.
Patricia Calabrese, give him your name.
Christian A. Musser.
Where was the first school you went to?
Type school on everything. Grade school.
Did you have to walk to school in bad weather and the heat and that also?
Most of the time you walk to it.
How did you get there if you didn't walk?
Dad would take you in a car sometimes.
Well, when you lived on a farm, especially in 1940s, late 40s and early 50s, I went to a one-room school. It was Sipes School, which was back on the Canal Road. And I went to that one-room school until I was halfway through 5th grade. We had no running water and outhouses, and when there was 8 grades, so when we had recess or lunchtime, even the little people got to play baseball because they couldn't organize a team with only the 6th and 7th and 8th graders. They needed us all involved.
You had a mile walk to go to school, and then that was for the first 8th grade.
All of the Musser children, of which there were eventually 7, spent their early school years at Sipes School, west of the farm on Locust Point Road.
How do you get the farm work and homework and everything else done when you're at a farm and they have things that need to be done?
Well, you got to tend to chickens, you got to tend to cattle and all that too while you're in the farm.
The Musser children were also active in the local fair and livestock shows, in addition to being expected to help out on the farm. The farm provided a living for the growing family, enabling them to be self-sufficient during the Depression era. During this time, the Mussers took in several children from local families and raised them on the farm along with their own family. Chris also took a section of land and made a pond on the western edge of the farm. This pond would feature prominently in local events for years to come. As World War II began, Chris was involved in the county's soil conservancy and converted his farming techniques to contour farming. The Department of Agriculture made a film about Chris and his adoption of these techniques in 1942.
despite a drought, was harvesting a bumper crop for a nation at war.
The York Chamber of Commerce history, published in 1945, features a discussion of the Department of Agriculture's film. The film was translated into several languages and was used in Europe to counteract German propaganda that claimed there were severe food shortages in the United States. The film was widely shown in the U.S. as well to encourage the new method of farming, which was adopted by over 100 farmers in York County alone. In addition to the field crops produced by the farm at this time, the Mussers also maintained 20 acres of orchards, worked 7 acres of truck garden, and raised swine, turkeys, and chickens. They retailed their produce over a regular route during the summer and operated a market stand in York all year round.
Chris had taken the first 2 steps in soil conservation. He had learned the facts about his land, and he had decided to put each acre into the kind of crop it was best suited to produce, whether that be grass or grain, row crops or trees.
The Second World War didn't only affect the business of the farm, it also impacted the Mussers as a family. Oldest son, Chris Jr., enlisted in the Army and was stationed in Alaska as an airplane mechanic. This influenced his later career when he became an auto mechanic, as well as the mechanic for his family's farm equipment. Glenn, the youngest of Chris Sr. and Anna's children, was born during the war while his brother, Chris Jr., was stationed in Alaska, resulting in the two not meeting until Glenn was already 2 years old. In the post-war period after World War II, there was increased demand for housing. The baby boom had begun. Chris Sr. sold various building lots on the eastern section of his farm. The area between York Street and South Main Street, and south of what is now known as Musser Street, was given over to this endeavor. Chris Sr. laid out Clover Lane and arranged for utility expansion, and then sold the lots. Homes were constructed by various builders. This area was ultimately annexed to Manchester Borough. Chris Sr. also sold lots on the west side of York Street, although these homes are not in the borough. One of the lots was purchased by Chris Jr., on which he built a house for himself, his wife Ida, and their children. Glenn tells a story of an event involving his brother Gordon, the farm's tractor, and the pond.
Manchester High School had a hockey team in those days. This was before Northeastern. This was the old high school building. They had a hockey team, and the winters were colder then, because I know in the latter 15 years that pond barely freezes over. But in those years it froze reliably enough that they could play hockey on the Musser Pond. So when the ice would get 8 or 10 inches thick, and it did, they would actually get on the pond with a tractor. And my second oldest brother, Gordon, was always the equipment operator. He made his living as a heavy equipment operator. But when he was a young man in his early 20s, he volunteered to push the snow off of the pond. And at one end of the pond, if anybody's ever familiar with going skating there, never froze over. The ducks that spent the winter there always had a little open area because it's where the spring water came into the pond. So that warm spring water, not very warm in the summertime, but warm when the pond is frozen, kept that end of the pond from freezing completely and being thinner. My brother Gordon was always the one for just, if it was good, a little more would just make it better. And one of these times, he had the whole pond cleared apparently of the snow, and I'm going to make another foot or two of space by pushing the big pile just a little more. And the weight of the tractor, the weight of all the snow, and the thin ice, of course you can guess. He went through the tractor, and he went through the ice, and it was fortunately not very deep there. there, only 3 or 4 feet. He told my father that the tractor was in the pond, and my father was pretty nonchalant, said, well, just go to the garage. And that was Bayshore and Kohler's garage. They have a big tow truck with the winch and all that stuff on them. Go to the garage and have them bring their tow truck down to pull this tractor. The tow truck operator wasn't going to go in that water to put the cable under the tractor. My brother Gordon had that honor.
Chris Sr. and Anna's children, the one who would take over the farm was their son, Paul. Paul had married Helen Gerber, who was raised on a farm near Dover, Pennsylvania. Helen was accustomed to life on a farm, so she knew what she was getting into.
First time I got here, I thought this must be awful far from Dover where I was born. But after you go up and down the road often enough, it's not far anymore. More than once, his mother came up to where I lived and brought me down to the farm because he was too busy, you understand, to come to Dover. But when you live on a farm, you know how farmers are. They got to work when the sun shines. And when the hay's ready, you bale the hay. So it didn't matter to me. Didn't matter.
Paul and Helen lived on the farm with Chris Sr. and Anna, and they had recently birthed their first child when Paul was drafted into the Army in the early 1950s. Following in the footsteps of his oldest brother, Paul went to Alaska to serve out his enlistment.
Paul and I got married in 1953. Till 1954, the government said, you're going to the Army. Before that, he had a deferment for being a farmer, but by then he was 25, and when you're over 25, you either go or you don't go. Well, I guess they needed him, so off he went. So I went home to my mother. I never even asked her if I could come back home, but I went back home with Barb, our oldest daughter. And then he came home, and he was in Alaska. But he said he liked it so in Alaska, if he'd not had a wife and a baby and a farm, he'd have stayed up there. So we've been here ever since, farming whatever farmers farm when it's a variety of stuff.
Chris Sr., Anna, Paul, and Helen operated the farm together for 2 more decades, with Paul gradually taking over more responsibilities. The farm became well known for its holiday turkeys, its sweet corn, and its outstanding smoked duck. During the harvest, the Musser women would cook huge meals for the many locals who came to help.
We cleaned turkeys for how many years till all the old ladies couldn't work anymore and no young ones want to clean turkeys. So that ended the turkey business.
The family built a large pavilion at the pond for events, gradually operating it as a reservations-only facility, which it remains today, due to the crowds it attracted for fishing, swimming, and ice skating. Countless family reunions, weddings, church picnics, and other events have taken place at Musser's Pond.
When I was about 2 years old, there was a very swampy area on the farm, and my father was involved with the county soil conservation service. They excavated and built a pond. Some people that lived in the town probably have been to events at the Musser Pond. They have a pavilion there now, and my father rented out space in past years, continuing my sister-in-law still does.
Well, that's where they had their recreation. They could go down there, they went swimming, and Grandpa was alive, and he did lots of entertaining down there, and the girls would go down and help him work in the kitchen and serve, and they just enjoyed it. It was recreation for them.
Chris Sr. remained active in agricultural circles during his retirement, serving as chairman of the York County Soil Conservation District and working with the Game Commission and the Farmers Production Credit Association. He and Anna moved into one of the houses on Board Road, where they had, what else, a garden of their own. Chris passed away in 1986, Anna in 1993, and their son Paul in 2018. Helen continues to operate the pond business and rents out the fields to another farm family. the Musser Farm continues to be one of the loveliest of our local farms, coming up on the 200th year of its existence and its 117th year of being the home base for the Musser family. As the 1942 film predicted, their careful stewardship of the land has enabled the farm to prosper for years to come.
In that movie that was made in the 40s, some of the prominent actors were two mules that they had. They got tractors in the late 30s, mules that would walk between the rows and to dig up the dirt to the weeds and that sort of thing. We had a hired man. His name was Cleve. I remember he was the one that actually operated the one mule that we had left, drove it, whatever you call it when you do a mule. And I was a little guy. He would set me on top of the mule, and while he was digging the garden, I would just ride along.